today with some help from John Best, our CEO. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to him. Tim, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you very much, Ryan. Appreciate it. If you can just give me one more second, I'm just getting my notes up, and we'll be ready to go.
Perfect. And one more time for people that might have joined late, if you are on a computer, you can input questions into the chat function. We ask everyone to stay on mute until the end of the presentation. We will give time for questions. So if you have questions during the presentation, or if something sparks your interest, just put it in the chat, and Tim and JB can look through those things at the end. We ask you to stay on mute till the end for that reason. And we hopefully this should run real smooth for you guys.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. So just want to introduce Best Innovation Group. It was founded Best Consulting 4 years ago to help credit unions by using technology and strategy combined to win, so that you can better serve your members. Big Consulting deeply understands credit unions, how they operate and make decisions, and we understand data and digital strategy. We've built AI systems, and in the changing world of CUs, credit unions, to be able to compete in, we want to make sure that everyone has access to the latest technology. So regarding things like blockchain, machine learning, AI, that type of stuff. So Big only serves credit union, and the reason why that's important is that allows us to concentrate on your main focus of serving your members and helping your credit unions be successful and be able to compete against banks out in the real world. So we provide consulting services on digital regarding data, core system selection, strategy growth, lending, and pretty much everything else regarding credit unions. We have a unique set of assessment services, inexpensive assessment services for credit unions to better help understand what their digital and data roadmap should look like. We are at the forefront of digital and data and credit unions. Big has sponsored the first analytic conference specializing in data and digital 5 years ago. And we have a hugely successful innovation club, where it's a combination of credit unions from all over the country in different sizes that help us innovate and create solutions for the industry, and help solve business problems with a relative speed. So excuse me one second. So as you know, data and business intelligence are now fundamental to success in our industry. From strategy to day-to-day decisions, data is one of the key drivers for better performance through analytical decisions, and allows you to make better decisions to make better outcomes over the long run of the credit union, rather than having that gut instinct, which is very helpful, and a lot of institutions have been very successful at that over the long term. It's getting more and more important to be able to make those decisions based on data, so that you can be strategic in those decisions. So the FinTech, as far as there's over 8,000 FinTech companies, the number is just growing, exponentially. And as far as our sacred cow, they're starting to cut into that sacred cow of member service. And we need to understand how that we can provide better digital interactions, use data to drive better selection of product offerings, and be able to use AI for enhanced digital services, and to enhance those services on the front line as well. So credit unions can use their inherent advantage of serving members as owners, not as a one-dimensional profit source, to enhance any artificial intelligence, machine learning driven service solution. But we know that service better than any of our competitors, because we've all been there making the decisions that you guys are having to make. We have a lot of expertise because we've been in your shoes, and we want to make sure that we have a real passion for credit unions, and we want to make sure that all the credit unions could take advantage of our background and be successful overall. So now I'd like to introduce John Best. So John, take it away. Hello, John.
All right, yeah, just had to be unmuted. Thank you so much, Tim. That was fantastic. So for those of you that don't know me, my name's John Best. I'm the founder here at Best Innovation Group, and I think you heard my son, who is working with us as well, started here. Just a little bit about why we started Best Innovation Group and why we're passionate about this stuff. One, I've worked at credit unions for over 25 years. I was fortunate enough to start in a very big credit union in Florida, Suncoast Credit Union. My friend and I who started in that we started kind of both on the lowest rung. We would plug in mice at your credit union, climb under your desk, and now he's the CEO and I run my own business. So I've just been very fortunate. I don't believe I would have been given all these opportunities in the industry, and I want to see us survive. When I started, there were a lot more credit unions, there are a lot less now. So what we have to do and what we're going to talk about here, and this is kind of based on the book that I just put out, is create a data-driven culture. And this is very difficult for us as credit unions because we've really operated on intuition, which has served us well. We've also been fortunate in our product lines and our customers that they are very linear in the sense that we don't have to serve the entire world. A lot of us have the good fortune of serving a particular segment or a particular type of customer based on our previous segments or our previous upbringing. But here are the things I think you really got to look at is, one, no more assumptions. I don't know about you, but I've been in a lot of meetings where someone goes, well, how many people do that? Or how many people do this? Or what's the frequency of this or that? And there's always someone in the room that everybody kind of turns to, and when you turn to that person, they sort of look up at the sky and go, well, it's about this. And that's been just fine, but we're going to have to move away from that to really get precise, because what's happening is others are becoming more precise, and it's creating margin that we won't be able to contend with in the future. So with that in mind, we have to use data to improve processes. I know a lot of folks who are going through a process overhaul right now with digital. And one thing that I really encourage everybody to think about is, what kind of data can you get from that process? And really, process expertise is important, particularly as we look at RPA or robotic process automation, basically things like AI and chatbots. We're going to have that data to determine where to put our efforts first. Now, the low-hanging fruit is going to be obvious, but there's going to be more to that. So as you rework your processes, we want to encourage you to really look at the data you can get from that and look at how you can use that data to improve those processes. One thing we find is accountability. Where does that buck stop? What's the problem with the funding of mortgages? Why is it taking so long? And there's so many people involved, from the title company to the funding side to the real estate person to the other bank. Where are our issues? And once we figure that out, we can have some accountability. That's been a struggle, a lot of finger pointing in a lot of our processes. A big piece of machine learning and understanding data is to go from what we do now, which I think is we rely on our experts in the economic space. We rely on our partners like CUNA Mutual or OnApproach or any of these other companies, as well as CUNA itself, Co-op, PSU, to help us find economic predictions. But I don't think we do as much scenario planning as we can with actual data. That's one of the big advantages of data, is we can drive the scenario planning. Another piece is, as you move forward, you'll find that the staff are going to start to become used to seeing data as part of their, communications. In other words, how did I, as a staff member or an employee, specifically impact the goals this month? And you can actually show them. You can draw all the way down and say, yeah, you were sitting out here and you helped close this many cars, or you turned this many transactions at the teller line, you made this many referrals. Whatever it is, people are going to start to want to see their specific goals so that they can improve. It's a great way to drive efficiency. It's a great way to drive performance from the organization. Data is used to determine deadlines. This is a big culture issue. If every project you do takes 2 years, and you still are budgeting for a 3-month turnaround, maybe you need to look at things we'll talk about the 2-year project in some other webinar, but there's issues there that need to be resolved, but we really have to plan in a way that's conservative and that's realistic. And I find that that's a good spot for data. using data analytics to assess risk, and not just the risk that I think we all identify loans as a risk within our institutions. It's very easy to see that data analytics is going to have a huge impact on lending, without a doubt. But let's use it for other things. We can determine the risk of technology. We can determine the risk of AI. We can determine the risk of a lot of other things by moving in that direction. One of the things that I want to encourage folks is, as we drive towards the CECL, the CECL deadline in 2020, of going from the incurred loss to the predictive, don't stop there. Don't just let it be for lending. Start looking at all of your processes and on how you can go from historical to predictive. And if data analytics really kind of features a stepping stone into this. The first one is always about historical, or what we call descriptive data, which means something that happened in the past. The way I like to talk.
John.
Trending, but when you start adding other data in, it becomes even more powerful.
JB?
Yes.
You cut out there for a good minute.
Okay, I'll come back then. So one of the things we'll talk about is data and how it relates to the stepping stone of data analytics. So we'll talk about descriptive data. The way I describe descriptive data is, answering the question, how many people went into this branch on a Wednesday of last week, sometime in the past? Then there's predictive. How many people are going to go into the branch next month or on this Wednesday? And then there's prescriptive. How many people how can we influence the number of people one way or another that are going into this branch or using this service or adopting this product? That's a real big piece of the risk portion of it. Finally, dashboards, that's going to be a big thing. We're always going to be looking at these dashboards. We're going to want to keep closer track of our numbers, because the margins are compressing. They're going to continue to compress. I'll talk a little bit about JP Morgan just for a second. JP Morgan had 180 lawyers on staff that were doing 360,000 hours of work a year. They replaced all of them with a product that's an artificial intelligence piece that now does what they do in minutes. And that kind of margin compression is going to really be an issue for us, and we can't get left behind on that. Finally, this just great quote from the Aberdeen Group: data-driven organizations saw a year-over-year increase in revenue of 27%, whereas other businesses who don't really have this culture-based data-driven platform only saw a 7% increase. And that's because margins make a difference. So this is my book. If you're interested, you can find it in Amazon. You can also go to, I've got actually a video series that we're about to launch. The book talks about all of these things. It goes into detail on data governance. It goes into detail on data analytics and the rollout. It goes into detail on AI. It goes into detail on machine learning. And it's really more of a how-to book as opposed to you should. None of us need another book that says you should go digital. No one needs that. We all know and have bought into that. What we need is a way to do it. And this is my with what I've learned, my practical approach to a lot of these things on how to bring those people in, how to look at culture, how to look at people, how to look at process, how to look at security, so you don't wind up like our friends at the Marriott, how to look at strategy and technology and what that mix is and how to drive it together for your organization. And if that isn't enough, this year, coming up in January, we're going to launch, if you go on to the next one here, I'm going to be launching our video series. So if you're interested in that, there'll be there's a link on breakingdigitalgridlock.com, which I'll put in the chat here in a second, where you can pre-order. You can also get a preview of it. It's a 6-part series. It's 6 hours of me going through the various aspects of the book and really talking through, including online quizzes and feedback, so you can actually go through and fill out some things about your culture, about your people, about your process, about your strategy, about your security and your technology, and I'll answer questions and work with you, almost like individual coaching. So we're excited to bring that to bear for those of you who are really just looking to push yourself further. And I'll turn it over to Tim. So Tim, thank you so much.
So Kirk Kurdelsky, who actually led and performed the overall data analytics position as far as how we stand in the credit union industry, was not able to make it today, so I'm going to be doing his portion of the presentation. And but if you want to reach out to Kirk, here's his contact information. And he's extremely good at looking at the data and technology from a strategic standpoint. and being able to make sure that an organization is aligning their strategy with their digital transformation. My name is Tim Tibbles, as you already know. I'm a consultant in data science with Best Innovation Group. I've been here for almost a year. I started out, I've been in financial services or credit unions for 17 years. I was the AVP of architecture at Baxter Credit Union, VP of technology at Consumers. I love data. I have an MBA in global studies and a BS in computer science and a degree in mathematics. So if you want to contact me, here's my contact information. And once again, we'll be sending out this deck. So now let's look at the overall, so what you've been waiting for is to get this result, which was developed in concert with OnApproach, which is a solution out there in the industry. This was a partnership, however, that doesn't necessarily mean that as big. We maintain our independence when it comes to making selection of solutions or making recommendations when we do our data analytics or RFP search. So don't think that that's like a permanent partnership from a recommendation standpoint, but one that actually helped to get this gather this data. So, so if you think of the from one of the greatest thinkers of the digital age is Arvind Sankaran. He's a venture partner at Jungle, and he helps that firm. The Jungle helps evaluate and manage portfolios of companies in fintech space. And as you see here, we're witnessing one of the largest transformations in financial services. It's just known as creative destruction. And if you're not thinking that anything's going to happen because of this, I think that you're going to be in for a surprise. So we are in essentially what's called the fourth generation of the Industrial Revolution, and that's where data and digital are reconstructing financial services. As I quoted before, there's over 8,000 fintechs now, and big techs such as Amazon, big banks are using mobile and data technologies. They're reinventing financial services, and there's no going back. And 73% of the people now use mobile technologies to access their financial services and their financial institutions. So if you're caught behind, it's going to be a bit of a problem. So the business intelligence and data analytics are essentially a foundation of business as we know it today. And I'm sure that you guys all know that, inherently. You're on the phone and, being on the webinar, you're inherently, curious and want to see how best you can take advantage of it. Of course, the main thing is to be able to make powerful decisions, make them better, faster, and more in alignment with your strategy. One thing to think of data, though, is not just data and a technology. It's really an overall strategy. It's not a project. It's not a visualization tool. It's really a cultural shift. It's operational. It's you're thinking, how do I align and make use of data so that I can make strategic bets, make strategic decisions. It's essentially as permeating our world, and that's the good news. We have tons of data on our members, and you can of course get access of tons of data from third-party sources. And in cooperation, we can get access to tons more data and win market share by using it effectively. So another person that's out there in the industry of financial services is Brett King, one of the great thinkers of the digital age. Brett King has discussed how services is now defined by data-driven digital channels. He's an Austrian futurist author and co-founder of CEO of Movin, a New York-based mobile banking startup. He is regarded as an influencer of financial services, and his book Augmented actually was just cited recently by China's President Xi Jinping hopefully I pronounced that properly, as recommended reading for artificial intelligence. So, he understands that banking has to, his quote was, banking has to work when and where you need it. It's not something that can be, we can't just push our service. We have to be listening to our members. We have to understand their behavior, and we have to understand the principles of big data to be able to understand those types of movement.
So just as an aside, Brett now has a really huge head about this, by the way. So you need to stop telling people about the Chinese president. He actually, for those of you that don't know, he did the he did the intro to my book. So he
Oh, great.
wrote a few pages on that. But he is absolutely right. You know, banking is not somewhere you go. It's something you do. He's famous for saying that.
Great. So here, data is becoming fundamental to all of our operations. Like I mentioned before, it's going to be driving member service, lending decisions primarily. It's our #1 revenue source besides non-interest income, and allow you to do risk management, profitability analysis, sales strategy, and all kind of levels of marketing. So data analytics literally are changing everything that we do. But the problem is that we're a little bit behind when it comes to the other financial institutions out in the marketplace. Big banks and big techs, by a 5-to-1 ratio over credit unions and community banks, are utilizing data to make strategic decisions. And if we don't up our game, we're going to start losing members and market share. On the other hand, if we attack and we change and we can get the upper hand on this, or at least be a quick follower, is to, since we have tons and tons of the data, with for our members, and we also have not necessarily just profit, but we have our members' best interests in mind. So we have a good alignment and trust from our members because of that. The larger financial institutions are not only ahead of us, but because of their early investments, they are now progressing to service and advanced and using advanced and predictive and prescriptive tools. Their top priorities investment are in analytics. And a key stat is that $16 billion have invested in fintechs by large banks. In other words, billions and billions are being invested in new technology. $2 billion by Chase alone this year. And if you think of it from, this kind of in the back, it's, from their standpoint, it's D-cubed. It's data, digital, and distributed ledger are being utilized across all these different fintech solutions to get an upper hand. So here's our executive summary. So this is our second semi-annual survey by Big and On Approach. It's completed in June of 2018. And so the overall executive findings, so that we compare this to what we saw in the past. So high level, 1/3 of credit unions have a data strategy and are attacking the problem. 1/3 of credit unions are moving forward slowly with a non-holistic departmental approach, but they are making some progress. And then there's another third, they're not doing anything. So, which of course, that's our biggest concern, is that, that's a lot of credit unions that are sliding into that bucket. So it puts the overall industry at risk. So we want to make sure that they're able to, get some kind of solutions in their hands, and tie it up with their overall strategy, and make sure that those solutions are fit for those credit unions. So the industry can be broken down essentially into two different minds. 2/3 see the need to use data to compete, serve, and grow. They see that their traditional competitors are investing heavily, and the non-traditional fintechs and the big techs that we mentioned, like the Amazons and such, are attacking relentlessly and starting to, impact bottom lines, because they are taking away market share that in previous world was not really happening. So another group is essentially, and don't want to be condescending, but they're burying their heads and seeing data analytics as strategy is maybe too complex, too sophisticated, it's not affordable, or not creating an ROI. And as you saw the previous statement that John had on his slide, that data-driven organizations have a significantly higher ROA. You're looking at 27% versus 7% growth. That's a pretty telling measure as far as what can be done if you utilize information effectively. The last group essentially is bucking every trend that we've observed across all the banking sectors and retail markets. The bottom line is that data analytics they're changing how all retail and banking firms do business. The huge amounts of data available is growing every day, providing new insight and propel thoughtful decisions, but it is a iterative process that is based on learning, adapting, testing, and using new tools. This is not something that's essentially, hey, I bought a product and put it in, and now we're, BI. This is a cultural change. The culture has to change in order to fully utilize the analytics, and this only happens over time. It's not going to be something that you put something in place and all of a sudden, bang, we've got business intelligence, and now we've got data aligned. This is something that, at its best, will take 2 to 5 years. But the sooner you start, you can start catching up. So let's look at some of the overall results of the survey. So on this one, CUs are essentially embracing data strategies, with roughly 35% believing data strategies are high or very high on their priority list. And there's another quarter of them that are not regarding analytics as important at all. So that's where some of those metrics came that I mentioned before. This survey question shows that the industry is acknowledging that they're far behind. 80%, nearly 80% of the, let me use approximately, of the 80% of respondents believe their credit unions are 2 or more years behind their competitors in the use of data. That's in today's world, that's a long time. As you know, things are changing very rapidly, and that can get you, set far behind. The farther behind you are, the more it's going to take to get caught up, because those other institutions are going to continue to move forward as well. On this credit union, what is your credit union's timeline to fully implement your data strategy? In 2017, credit unions were saying that they had time to adopt data strategy, and 2/3 of the credit unions had a timeline that were 2 or more years out from completion. And then once again, when compared to our competition, our sense of urgency seems to be out of line with the retail world. The conundrum is that we understand the need, but we're still behind, and yet we aren't acting with urgency to attack the challenge and the opportunity, based on the answers to the other questions. Our question 11 was, how often does your organization use data analytics to make decisions? This gets back to, that point that John was making, that, you can't be, doing the gut all the time. You start missing the mark on a lot of strategic decisions, or going down wrong paths. Those can essentially start resulting in money that's being inefficiently allocated across your organization. And further proof of slow adoption is that 40% of the credit unions hardly use analytics to make decisions, and only 1/3 are using data more than 50% of the time. You might want to let that sink in a little bit. Only 1/3.
Yeah, I was, that was really fascinating when that number came back, Tim, and I was thinking about that. And I think one of the reasons that we've seen this is that there's always been, an opportunity to recover. We've always had this incredible trust with our members. We've always had this incredible trust with our leadership, our boards, our incredible volunteer boards who do this. But what's happening is we're seeing, one, sort of the transition into this, like I said, this margin compression, particularly with a looming recession. And then the other side of it is that as people think about how to recover from these things and what they've done in the past, there's no longer, you're not flying at 50,000 feet anymore. You've got a lot of time to right the plane if you're up that high. It feels like we're flying more at like 20,000 feet for recovery mode. And so as we can't afford sort of the mistakes. And then the final piece is the profit margin around things like marketing, right? It's not going to be enough to do the kind of shotgun marketing we've been doing, to where we're just hoping that we'll achieve these sorts of things. The other organizations who have far more money than us are really looking at how they market around with data analytics. It's more like spear fishing. It's very individual. It's really targeting, and getting a far bigger return off each marketing dollar than what we're seeing in our space. So with that in mind, that's the concern about not using data analytics for decision making. Now, I want to make sure that we understand that you have to trust your data in order for this to work. So I think one of the reasons that a lot of folks don't make decisions using this is, and I'm sure on the phone, I'll just throw it out there, you're welcome to toss it in chat, but how many of you have gotten a report or a spreadsheet and you're like from some fancy new system, and you get it and you look through it and you go, yeah, something really looks wrong here. I doubt 75,000 people use the ATM, between 1 and 2 p.m. on this date, right? But as soon as you find that error, we then distrust that system altogether. And it's real, we all start off very trusting. We all start off, really understanding and respecting the process. But as soon as we see that error, that trust goes away. And that, I think, is the biggest issue here is, in our next survey, we're going to have to ask the trust question, do you trust your current data? Because that's really, I think, the backbone behind this. So just some random thoughts.
John, that's really actually leads right into my next slide, is that in the industry, some of you may be familiar with this, there's 5 different levels as far as where business and analytics can go in your organization. And, we feel that most organizations in the industry are between level 1 and level 2. Some other organizations have made it to level 3, but to be able to make it to 4 and to 5 are, extremely difficult. But if you're not getting there, those are things that can, impede your ability to compete with organizations that have reached that level. As far as you go through each one of these different levels in your organization, that trust is probably the number one thing that you have to do. So it's not, whenever you start building out and either building out or using analytic solutions, you want to make sure that that trust is built in at the very beginning. Have we built in processes that enable us to verify that the data is correct? Either manually, you have like a regular audit, or you've got systems in place that double check and balance between the host systems. And as you add additional data sources in, if you've built that as a basis and a brick at the very beginning, as in your foundation, that trust will just come along with it when you start reaching level 4 and 5. So when it predicts and says, this particular person, you should really offer this product, if no one trusts the solution or the rules and the business processes that you built in to actually come up with that prediction, then they're not going to offer that product on the front line, because they're going to go back and start trusting that intuition rather than actually trusting that the system came up with that prediction for a reason. And of course, over time, people, if you've got that trust built in, then it will eventually, from the very beginning, it will make its way through all the 4 different levels. So everything essentially starts with the strategy. So you need to identify your strategy. Business intelligence is at the heart of that strategy. So you want to make sure that understanding your business and your members better is the reason why you're doing this. It's the fundamental. And one of the things that you want to make sure when we say tying this with your strategy is that there's not a one-size-fits-all solution, or process, or culture, or governance model that fits any particular organization. It really needs to be something that's fine-tuned and works within your organization and your culture. And there may be some shifts in culture that need to be made, but you want to make sure that it's built in as you go through this evolution, that you match it with the type of culture and business that you have already built, because it's being successful, but it would be more successful as you push and get to that that 20% growth levels, that type of thing. So in 2018, while 42% of the credit unions reported having a data strategy, and a whopping 58% did not. This is a challenge for the entire industry, as you can tell. And how many large banks or regional banks, those that with the market share, do not have a strategy in place and likely have it in place in the next 5 years or more? It's going to be growing substantially, and you want to make sure that you're in place to be able to do that as well. In 2018, even worse, only 35% of the credit unions have a roadmap for full integration and implementation of their data strategy. Very important finding, like just like a business plan or a map when you're entering a new area. Without a roadmap, you're very likely to get lost, start spending money ineffectively, and getting disappointing results, and of course, going back to that earlier point, not trusting the results. That's an immediate disaster for any kind of business intelligence solution. Here's from a technological perspective, here's an example what a typical roadmap might look like. This is one that we've developed for one of our credit unions from the technology side. You'll notice this doesn't have the cultural roadmap components to it, but from a technology perspective, this is what we've recommended. It's essentially a set of paths to creating the building blocks to a fully integrated and comprehensive data governance, data model, warehouse, and tool sets and skills. If it's interconnected and holistic, typically the first few levels would take about 18 to 36 months to fully implement, if the organization's dedicated and behind the overall initiative. How would you rank the goals of your data strategy? So the first one being marketing, which a lot of organizations, that's their key thing because they spend a lot of money on marketing. The next is improving member service, and after that is lending, and then efficiency. Our first question was, has your credit union invested in any analytics tools in the last 12 months? And you'll notice that there's something kind of funny about this. Interesting that 62% of credit unions have purchased some tools or even hired people for data analytics in 2018. And as you remember, if you look back at some of those other things, only a very few of them have an overall strategy or a roadmap in place. So they're making investments without even looking at and coming up with, what's that long-term strategy. It's kind of like jumping on a boat and slamming it in high gear and just wondering where you're going to end up. You probably don't want to do that. So so what is your two?
Just
Go ahead.
Jumping in on that, one of the things I think that's that I was talking about, I think a lot of people see where regulatory is forcing us to some of those things, and so I think they're considering that investment. And as I said, my concern is that it's great to plug sort of the one hole in the ship with your finger as you walk by, but it's not going to help you if there's a bunch more. And that's why and I know I get sick of hearing the word strategy, but it's true that if you can find a way to sort of accomplish the CECL goal, but at the same time sort of up your game altogether in analytics at the same, with maybe something like Power BI or whatever, that's a better approach. And so it's kind of like, hey, make those dollars for the CECL goal account for more than just CECL. And I think that's what we're seeing in some of that response, in my personal opinion. So one of the next things that we're definitely going to put on the survey is a CECL question as well.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks, John. And now on this slide, what is your 2018 budget for data analytics? While some purchases have been made, but the budget's very modest compared to what the banks and fintechs are making, and that's even putting us a little bit further behind. You can imagine that trying to catch up with them is going to take a little bit more investment than $50,000 per year. So 70%, if you look at this, are investing $200,000 or less in something that is probably should be a key driver in your organization going forward. So if you can imagine only investing $200,000 in lending or $200,000 in marketing department or HR, that would probably be start making those departments kind of wither. So you might want to think about, from a strategic standpoint, how much is it worth based on those growth goals that we mentioned before. What would it be like if you fully invested into this type of an initiative? So question number 2, John, I'm getting a little bit of noise. Where have you spent your analytics budget? So probably the biggest one is that dashboards and reporting. The next one is tools and people, and then the actual data warehouses themselves. But as you know, based on the previous slide, the investments that they're making are relatively small. And number 10, when do you expect to get a return on your investment for data strategy? This actually has a little bit of good news in it. Credit unions were asked when do they expect that return to happen? And 60% expected it to get a return on their investment in 3 or more years. So we believe this is actually a healthy thing. A data strategy, like any effective strategy, is typically 3 to 5 years in the making. So data, strategies require fundamental operational, technology, and cultural changes. So it does take time. So we believe this is actually a good sign. And question 9, please rank the challenges your credit union faces in implementing data analytics. And as you can see here, the obstacles are not surprising. A lack of integration. Most credit unions have several systems that require integration. We estimate that 10 or more systems are very typical at most of the credit unions, and even some of the smaller ones. Recently, in one of the credit unions that we did, that was 300 million, they had 22 different data sources that in the long run they wanted to be able to integrate into their data warehouse solution. So skill sets wise, most credit unions have not wrestled with the level of skills required. They might be shifting or setting up an organizational structure, putting some folks maybe in IT, but there's not really a necessary big shift going on there. And that, keeping stuff in a single department may or may not work for your organization. So once again, it gets back to the alignment with your strategy. And it also, by making those changes and such, you're going to start, complicating how the reporting structure and decision making is being made across the organization. So those all need to be well aligned. The next big obstacle is money. Because most of the cores do not contain all the necessary data, and thus a data model needs to be created, and new skill sets have to be brought in. Credit unions will need to set up a budget and make investments in order to produce the results that they're expecting. So the organizational chart of the future. So where do you believe that would be a good place to put it? To get these obstacles, some consideration about the HR issues need to be made, and they're important at the beginning of the strategy creation. The change and adoption of data and digital and urgency is the makeup of your culture. So you'll be making investments, you'll be changing where talent is, you'll be determining can I actually afford this? Where money doesn't grow on trees, so what do I have to take funds from to be able to make something like this work? And then and then finally, if you can afford them, how will you ever get them to work for you with so much competition in the market? So one of the things that we believe in is that you need to get it at the top. You need to get data up to the discussions going on at the strategic level. So either in the boardroom or in your regular senior management team meetings, it'll be important to have this front and center. So when we asked, does your organization have a chief data officer, which is something some organizations do. We had about 5% say yes. The rest of them say no, but this is something that you might want to consider: is how are you going to be getting this up at the organizational level so it makes sense. So some of the key takeaways then. So in summary, data strategy is fundamental to the strategy in the same way that technology is fundamental to operations. It's essentially the gas for the engine that powers the business. So if you buy a cheap engine and try to put gas into it, you're probably going to get the performance of a Yugo. If you get the right engine that aligns with your business and overall strategy, you're probably going to make it a lot further and a lot faster. So credit unions have awoken. They are starting to think about this stuff and understand that data analytics and business intelligence are critical to making the right decisions when serving the members and growing the business. Most CUs are not looking at data, though, strategic and holistically and analytically, as you can see from some of those investments that they've been making without a roadmap, which suggests that they will suffer through some disparate systems and databases and decisions based on partial data, ineffective tools, and lack of investment and skill sets. So if they continue to go down this path, they'll be ultimately losing out to the competition. And but as we know, this is something that's been going on for years, business intelligence and things like that. There's been a real change, a lot of game changers that are happening recently, and that they aren't as expensive. There's been a lot of credit unions that are utilizing and aligning themselves with some vendors that really help out. So it's really not too late that you can get, some investments that make sense. You can, you have a distinctive advantage in that you have low cost of capital and lower expenses. So generally, centralized databases and such like that, and you have that member trust that you'll be able to, you may not be able to pass up Chase. Of course, that's probably something that we'll never be able to do. But the overall goal should be that you have a roadmap in place. You understand what you're trying to do with it. You understand what the potential ROIs are, so that you can actually start strategizing and prioritizing where those investments should be made from a BI perspective. Vendors are flocking into the industry. On a regular basis, we're talking with new entrants, and we are actually trying to help some of those new entrants come up with an overall business strategy. And because we understand, the credit union industry, very well. So now is the time to assess your data strategy and plan and create a plan and, attack this issue head on. So, I want to thank you, and we'll open up the channel now for about 10 or so minutes. So, if you don't have questions, you stay and listen in to some of the questions that happen. So hopefully we can, all, get something out of it. So, Ryan, can you open up the phone so that folks can jump in? Or if you don't feel comfortable, talking on the phone to ask a question, you can just type something into the chat box.
Yeah, everybody, you're free to come off mute and ask a question if you'd like at this time.
Anyone? All right, type something in the chat box if you're having issues with getting off of mute.
I have a question just to break the ice, and Tim, this is for you. Tim, you've become recently an expert in I call you an expert. You have your PhD in data. Really.
I don't have a PhD.
Pretty
don't
much.
Tell anybody that.
pretty much at this point for all you've done with everything. But you've been doing a lot with machine learning. How do you feel that plays into the credit union space? Like, for example, is that going to be something that is a talent that credit unions are going to have to develop, or is it outsourcing forever? That's one question. And then, I have another thought around sort of the last inch of this, but let's start there.
Okay. So first of all, machine learning goes into that bucket of levels 4 and 5. So it's not something that I would start jumping in, head over fist first. It's something that I would wait till you start building that trust in your data, and you've got enough data sources that it actually makes sense to start trying to make some of those predictive things, because otherwise you're going to be predicting based on a very small subset of information. But the overall goal of machine learning is to embed in your business processes essentially a repetitive decisioning support system that gets better over time. So, it's not one of these things you can kind of put in the corner and have it decide, and then, you never touch it again. But machine learning, I believe, I feel it's pretty amazing actually what, what, has been, has been such a revolution, because there's so many open source systems out there that allow people to make investments in machine learning, at a relatively low cost. The cost is going to be in your people. Data scientists typically start at about $130,000 per year. That's their beginning salary, and it goes on up from there. But you can get data analysts that are fully capable of utilizing some of those systems and come up with surprising results. So I personally believe it's going to have a, once you get into that level 4 and 5, your organization will be hungry for things that are integrated into your operational processes so that you can make decisions on the fly. And those types of systems is what's going to enable that.
So real quick, I just want to make sure no one else has a question that wants to pipe in. If not, I have one last question. All right. So here's my last question. I find that, when I look at this model of data analytics, a lot of what comes out of these engines is really marketing, right? Opportunities or offers for specific subgroups of people. That is, I think, a very, I think there's plenty to act upon in terms of finding rates or changes in your loans. There's lots of that. Those are nice propositions because they don't require what I'm going to call that last inch, right? And that last inch is the distance between the device that the member's on and the member. And one of the challenges that I've seen is that people are not dragging their digital along with them, where when they get this incredible information out of this great digital data analytics product that says, guess what? Here's your exact demo. And here is a list of every single person that, we're 90% sure if you offer them this deal, based on bill pay and based on this, that they'll take it. And then they go to do that and find that their digital solutions, whether it be their mobile, their online banking, or whatever, in the one, it lacks the capability of targeting those people. And then two, the fulfillment of it is an issue. So even though, we've found where to throw our net for all the fish, we don't really have a good net to catch the fish, nor a way to clean them all. That's why, I keep talking about the digital strategy going hand in hand with this, because I just wanted to get your thoughts. I mean, I think you've experienced that as well, right? In your travels?
Yeah, definitely. It's actually a really good point because, you don't want to get somebody, that offer, that comes in to the call center and all of a sudden they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And now I've got to go and manually enter in all this information, into my application system instead of having it as a, one-click, fulfillment process. So, that's wherein lies where you need to look at your partners and your vendors that you have for online banking, for your lending, for when you receive an email, yeah, I want this product, I want to start this immediately. It doesn't take 3 days for you to get back to them. It's pretty much immediate fulfillment. So that goes back to your digital strategy where you're working with your vendors and you're working with or maybe your internal developers, where that you're looking at this holistically, not as I've got this data solution and I'm going to shoot off all these offers and I have no way of really integrating those offers into the overall business process. So you really need to take a look at don't start just firing off stuff. Make sure that you look at the entire business process from beginning to end, and making sure that these solutions and things that you're working with actually integrate that overall, those decision-making processes that have been automated. You don't want to, look like, oh wow, they were able to give me the perfect, product, but now I'm want to bang my head against the wall as they're sitting there, filling out my mortgage application manually for me. I agree. It's definitely going to be a challenge.
Well, it's just a concern I have that people go whole hog into this and then are very frustrated because they can't deliver on the other side. I think you painted a great picture of that. Well, that's all I had. I think we have 2 minutes to give back to everybody. Tim, I just want to thank you. You did a great job of providing that insight from this. And I know that you've been intimately involved in, creating these large data analytics systems for years. So I know you have a lot of background in that. Just want to encourage anybody, if you have questions, thoughts, if you're interested in talking about a data analytics, strategy, that's what we want to do. We work with people on that, really help you with your governance, try to understand, even where all your data is and how you can even organize that so you don't fall into that trust issue. What are the relationships between your data entities and what is your relationship to digital? So I think it's, to me, this is the #1 most important new skill or discipline that you have to master because it leads to AI. You can't have AI if you don't have data analytics, because AI is not built on processing power. It's not built on a giant Watson-like computer. It's going to be built on the quality, the velocity, and the volume of your data. And so if you have quality data, you have a lot of data so that you can actually, build these intuitions, and that it's up to date. That's how AI is, one, going to help your consumers. And I will tell you, the first time that these apps start going, hey, one more trip to Chili's and you can't pay your mortgage, or hey, if you paid this bill right now and then did this, you'd have an extra $250 in your account per month. That's going to be revolutionary, and people will leave us for whoever does that. The good news is we are well positioned to get there first, and it's just a matter of planning. That's where I think the game changer is, and data analytics is the foundation of machine learning and AI, and without that, you're going nowhere. So with that said, I'll close it out if you don't mind, Tim.
Oh, no, it's great. Thank you so much. And in summary, don't hesitate to reach out to myself, Kirk, or John. And it's been a pleasure. Hopefully you were able to glean something out of this. And if you want to send us any feedback, please do. We want to make sure that we're answering your questions. And we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.